Hello everybody, in this video we are going to understand the muscles of mastication. But before moving on to the muscles of mastication, I would like to give a brief overview of the mandible. Mandible is also known as the lower jaw. It's a common insertion site for all the masticatory muscles. So all these muscles associated with mastication will insert on the mandible. The mandible can be divided into three parts. One is the body of the mandible. The second one is the two rami of the mandible. And the third is the angle of the mandible. Now the two rami of the mandible can further be classified into the coronoid process and the condylar process. The coronoid process is present at the anterior portion, just like the coronoid process is present anteriorly in the ulna. Similarly, even in the mandible, the coronoid process is present anteriorly, while the condylar process is present posteriorly. Now, this condylar process can further be classified into the neck and the head. The head of the condylar process is covered with articular cartilage, and this articular cartilage will form the lower part of the temporomandibular joint. The temporomandibular joint is the jaw joint, which actually helps in opening and closing the mouth. It's a modified hinge joint. Now that we know the basics about the mandible, let's move on to the muscles of mastication. We have a total of 4 muscles for mastication. The first one is the masseter, second is the temporalis, third is the medial pterygoid, and the fourth and the final one is the lateral pterygoid. Let's look at the masseter muscle first. Now if you break this word masseter, it becomes mass eater. By using this trick, I remember that the mass eater muscle, which is the masseter muscle, is the strongest muscle of mastication. It is also the most superficial muscle of mastication. It is rectangular in shape and it's covered by a very strong masseteric fascia. Now let's look at the two layers of the masseter. So the two layers of the masseter are the superficial layer and the deep layer. The superficial layer originates on the maxillary process of the zygomatic bone as well as the inferior surface of the anterior 2/3 of the zygomatic arch, while the deep layer will originate on the posterior 1/3 of the inferior surface of the zygomatic arch. Superficial layer is going to originate slightly up as well, which is on the zygomatic bone as well as the zygomatic arch, while the deep layer is going to originate only on the zygomatic arch. And both of them are going to insert on the lateral surface of the ramus of the mandible as well as the angle of the mandible. Next we go to the temporalis muscle. The temporalis muscle is a fan-shaped muscle and it's present on the lateral part of the skull. To be specific, it's present on the temporal part of the skull. It originates on the temporal fossa and it inserts on the apex of the coronoid process of the mandible. Next, we move to the pterygoid muscles. We have two pterygoid muscles. One is the lateral pterygoid and the other one is the medial pterygoid. Lateral pterygoid is the main muscle. Now, why do I call the lateral pterygoid as the main muscle? The lateral pterygoid is the main muscle because this muscle is going to insert on the temporomandibular joint and it's going to keep it intact. So whenever the jaw moves, it's this lateral pterygoid muscle that's going to insert onto temporomandibular joint and prevent dislocation of the jaw. Hence, it's performing a very crucial function. Therefore, if you notice over here, the divisions are not superficial and deep, but it is superior and inferior. While in the other muscles, like if you notice the medial pterygoid, it's superficial and deep. Even if you notice the masseter muscle, the divisions are superficial and deep. But over here in the lateral pterygoid, we have to name it as superior and inferior because there is one part, which is the superior part, that's performing this very superior function of preventing dislocation of the jaw. So this superior part, to prevent dislocation of the jaw, we know it inserts on the temporomandibular joint. It is superior, but it's going to originate on the infra part of something. It's originating on the infratemporal crest of the sphenoid bone. Next, let's look at the inferior head of the lateral pterygoid. To discuss the origin of the inferior head of the lateral pterygoid, we'll compare it with the deep head of the medial pterygoid. So if you notice this point written here on the left, both the pterygoid will originate from the lateral plate of the pterygoid process of the sphenoid bone. So that is with respect to the inferior and deep part. Both of these are going to originate on the lateral pterygoid plate of the sphenoid bone. The lateral pterygoid muscle, just like the name suggests, is going to originate on the lateral surface of the lateral pterygoid plate, whereas the deep head of the medial pterygoid is going to originate on the medial surface of the lateral plate of the pterygoid process. And then the inferior head of the lateral pterygoid will insert on the pterygoid fovea, which is present on the neck of the condyloid process of the mandible. Next, we have the superficial head of the medial pterygoid. Now, the superficial head, the deep head and the inferior head, they have somewhat coordinated for their origin site. So, the superficial head, to originate, it's starting to look at the superior head of the lateral pterygoid, but it could not find the superior head because it's performing a very superior function. Therefore, the superficial head, in hope of searching the superior head, has decided to stand on a slightly raised surface to look for the superior head. Therefore, it stands on the tuberosity of the maxilla, which is its first origin site. But in spite of standing on the tuberosity of the maxilla, it could not find the superior head of the lateral pterygoid. Hence, it decided to go on a further elevated portion, which is the pyramidal process of the palatine bone. Finally, it found the superior head and realized it's performing a very superior function. Therefore, it has to manage with its own origin sites. Both the heads, that is the superficial and deep head of the medial pterygoid muscle, is going to insert at the same point, which is the medial part of the angle of the mandible. Medial part of the angle of the mandible. So these are the 4 muscles of mastication. This is an overview of the entire content covered in this video. I hope this video was helpful. That's all we have for today. Thank you.